Welcome to The Forgotten Heir, an emotional journey of betrayal, justice, and family bonds. Have you ever wondered what happens when the people you love most quietly erase your existence? That's the painful reality of Vanya faces when she discovers her family has secretly transferred all their assets to her sister, removing her from the family legacy and even attempting to erase all traces of her existence. This story will take you through the journey from initial shock, through painful discoveries, to a tense legal battle, and finally the difficult path toward healing. But this isn't just a story about money and property. It's a story about self-worth, dignity, and the strength to stand up for what's yours, even when it means confronting your own family. Join us as we explore how Avanya transforms from someone constantly seeking validation to someone brave enough to demand justice, not with angry shouts, but with quiet determination and dignity. Because sometimes, true strength isn't in slamming doors, but in walking away with your head held high. Prepare yourself for an emotional journey full of unexpected turns and profound lessons about family, legacy, and what it truly means to be a worthy heir. It was a Sunday in early spring when I found out my family had thrown a party without me. I was returning from a client site south of Dallas, my SUV humming along the familiar streets of my childhood. When I drove past my parents' house on Timberleaf Drive, balloons fluttered in the breeze. Cars lined both sides of the curb. A professionally printed banner read, "Celebrating our pillar Callista's 10 years leading Bundy Freight." Callista, not our parents, not the family, just her. I parked two houses down and sat still behind the wheel. I didn't know what stung more, the fact that I hadn't been invited or that I wasn't surprised. Growing up, I had believed things would balance out eventually, that hard work would be noticed, that if I just kept showing up, helping, making the right choices, I'd matter. But lately, being invisible wasn't just a phase, it felt intentional. I drove away before someone spotted me. At home, I pulled out a plastic bin of old keepsakes I'd been meaning to organize. Near the bottom, I found the silver hairpin engraved with a single letter, E. My mother had given it to me on my 16th birthday, saying, "As long as you wear it, I'll always see you as strong." At the time, it had made me feel like I mattered, like she saw me. Now I wasn't so sure. It wasn't just sentiment at stake. Over the past 6 years, I'd funneled nearly $80,000 into helping my parents pay off their second mortgage after the market crash. I'd covered the emergency plumbing repairs when a pipe burst during the Texas freeze. I'd paid for the new roof and the surprise property tax bill in 2020. Every time I'd helped, my mother called it a family favor. Apparently, those favors didn't come with a seat at the family table. That night, while reheating leftover chili, my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I almost let it go to voicemail, but something made me answer. "Avania," a male voice said. "This is Gerald Hellbrook. I was your parents' estate attorney." The past tense made my stomach tighten. "I'm sorry to call out of the blue, but I've been meaning to follow up on the trust transition paperwork. You never returned your copy." I frowned. "What paperwork?" There was a pause. "It was sent 3 months ago, certified mail to your apartment address in Garland." "I never received anything," I said. "Would you have a moment to meet in person?" he asked. "I think we need to review a few things together." The next morning, I went to the post office. The clerk checked the forwarding history on my mailbox. "Apparently, your name had been temporarily removed due to a change of service form," she said, looking uncomfortable. She turned the monitor so I could see. It was signed digitally by Callista Bundy. "My sister," I said flatly. The clerk nodded. The submission came from a personal email, not your family domain, and it says the address was updated to Callista Bundy's name only. She hesitated. That's unusual. Normally, these requests come from the account holder. I nodded and walked back to my car, my ears ringing. This wasn't carelessness. This was deliberate. Mr. Hellbrook's office was in a renovated Victorian house with green shutters and a brass knocker. He greeted me with a wary look and led me to a quiet conference room with blinds drawn halfway. "I want to be clear," he began. "What I'm showing you today is based on your parents' most recent instructions, but it may surprise you." He laid a copy of the current trust documents on the table. The signatures were real. The notary seal was there. My parents had legally signed over every piece of family property, land, and company share to Callista. "All of it," I whispered. "I know this is difficult," he said, "but I thought you'd seen this before." I shook my head slowly. "Mr. Hellbrook, in the older version, was I included?" He nodded. "Yes, as co-beneficiary. That version is still in our records unless they formally revoked it." He paused, stood up, and walked over to his safe. With careful hands, he removed a cream envelope, thick and sealed with a gold sticker. "This," he said, "was meant for you. It's dated 6 months before the new documents. Your parents dropped it off themselves." I stared at it. "Why didn't I ever get this?" He sighed. "Your sister picked it up the day you were supposed to. Said she'd deliver it." "Of course she did." I broke the seal and unfolded the letter inside. My stomach dropped as I read the first line. The letter inside wasn't just sentimental, it was legal. A notarized copy of the original trust document, naming me as 50% co-owner of our parents' real estate and their retirement fund, dated 14 months ago. My mother's signature, my father's, too. "I'll give you time with it," Mr. Hellbrook said gently, placing a glass of water beside me. "Take it home and, Avanya, don't rush to respond. Process first." "Mr. Hellbrook," I asked before he left, "aren't you in a difficult position if you're still my parents' attorney? Why are you showing me this?" He sat back down, his expression grave. "As their attorney, I have a fiduciary duty to execute the legal documents they sign, but I also have an ethical and legal obligation to notify all named beneficiaries of changes that affect them. When the new trust was executed, you should have been formally notified since you were named in the original." He sighed. "I'm walking a fine line here, Avania, but I believe in doing what's right within the bounds of my professional obligations." Later that afternoon, I drove out to my dad's mechanic shop. The place looked just as it had for 20 years. Same corrugated siding, same squeaky front doorbell. I hadn't visited in months. Dad was sitting behind the counter, flipping through invoices. He looked up and gave me a polite, neutral smile. "No warmth, just recognition." "Didn't expect you today," he said. I shrugged. "Thought I'd say hi." The air was thick with motor oil and distance. My eyes drifted to the back wall, the founder's plaque we had installed 10 years ago. I'd designed it myself. It used to list my name beside Callista's under our parents. But now the gold strip under Founders had only 3 names. Mine was gone. "Was the plaque updated?" I asked, pretending to admire the shine. He didn't look up. "Callista's been helping more lately." "She's earned it." I bit the inside of my cheek hard. "So erasing someone's name now counts as a promotion. You moved out. You're doing your own thing," he said with a shrug. "Callista's been through a rough patch with her second divorce. She needed something stable, something to call her own. You've got your engineering career. You don't need this place like she does." "Right, my own thing, paying your mortgage, managing logistics across 5 states, living without recognition." I left before I said something I couldn't take back. That evening, I pulled up the Dallas County Clerk's online portal. I typed in my parents' address and clicked through the deed history. There it was. 3 months ago, the house had been legally transferred to Callista Bundy. No mention of joint owner, no trust, just a clean, quiet change. And then I found the second document, the transfer of our father's share in the family warehouse lot to Callista as well. Yeah, ma'am. I continued digging and discovered these changes started shortly after I presented a proposal to modernize the family business with new logistics software and warehouse automation innovations I'd learned about through my corporate work. Dad had seemed enthusiastic, but Callista had called my ideas unnecessary expenses and corporate nonsense. A week later, they'd canceled the planning meeting. 2 weeks after that, the first legal transfer appeared. My phone buzzed with a message from Callista. "Don't make this messy. You were never meant to have it anyway." That line wasn't just cruel. It confirmed everything, and it lit a fire in me. Sunday morning rolled in with the same bright Texas sun that had warmed my childhood. I didn't do my hair. I didn't wear perfume. I didn't even bother with the deviled eggs my mom always expected me to bring. Their driveway was already packed when I pulled up. Church friends in pastel cardigans chatted with Callista near the door. She looked like she'd stepped out of a Southern Living magazine, hair curled, dress fitted, laughter just loud enough to command attention. "Oh, you made it," she said with a tight smile when she saw me. Inside, my mother was directing a teenager around the serving trays. She clasped her hands together when she saw me. "It's so nice to have both my girls here," she cooed, eyes lingering on Callista, especially the one who's been here through thick and thin. Lunch was buffet style. Callista gestured to the dining room. "We saved you a seat at the big table," she said, voice sugar-coated. "Just for today. You've always preferred the couch, though," Mom chimed in, as if my exclusion had been my choice all along. Small talk buzzed around the table. Retirement plans, choir rehearsals, Callista's charity work. Then, with a clink of her glass, she stood. "I just wanted to thank everyone for supporting my new initiative," she said, beaming. "The Callista Grace Foundation for Women in Recovery." Applause, camera flashes, my mother dabbing her eyes. "The startup funds came from the estate," Callista added casually. "My parents believe in what I'm doing, and I'm honored to carry the family legacy forward." I stared at my wine glass. Red droplets clung to the rim like evidence. That money part of it was mine, or was supposed to be. After lunch, I excused myself and headed to the guest bathroom. I locked the door and stared at myself in the mirror. The woman staring back looked tired, not from age, but from effort unnoticed. I opened the cabinet to grab a tissue and noticed a thick envelope tucked between old coupons and expired Tylenol. My gut clenched. I pulled it out, an invitation. Cream card stock with gold edges. Founders Dinner honoring Callista Grace Bundy as sole legacy bearer of the Bundy family vision. The date was next month. What caught my eye were the corporate sponsor logos at the bottom major logistics companies and regional banks. Callista wasn't just taking the family assets. She was leveraging her new position to forge business alliances that would exclude me entirely from the industry I'd worked in for years. I walked out past Callista, who was chatting with someone about guest lists. "I hope you enjoy the last meal where no one questions your lies," I whispered as I passed. The next morning, I called in a personal day and headed downtown to the county courthouse. In the records office, I requested all property records related to our family. The recent deeds and legal filings included the lake house in Cedar Ridge, a place my grandfather had built by hand. At first glance, the quitclaim deed looked legitimate, but then I saw my father's signature, Ronald C. Bundy. The loops were off. The slant was wrong. I printed copies, then called Mr. Ledbetter, our family's former estate attorney who'd retired 2 years ago. When I told him what I'd found, he agreed to see me that afternoon. "This signature's off," he muttered, examining the deed through his glasses. "I think it was forged," I said. He nodded slowly. "I've seen this happen before, but what makes this interesting is that your father created a contingency trust in your name 10 years ago." "A what?" "A trust that activates if he's declared incapacitated or if there's credible evidence of financial manipulation." He tapped the document. "This deed, if proven false, could trigger it. Would that override the current will? If the trust is valid and the trigger conditions are met, yes, you could effectively reclaim legal control of a large portion of the estate." I left his house with shaky but steady hands. I didn't cry. I didn't cheer. Instead, I called Norrell Nix, an attorney I'd worked with on a veterans housing initiative, and hired a handwriting analyst. Through professional connections, I also tracked down Jamie, a nurse who had worked at the hospital during my father's mild stroke. "I remember your dad," she confirmed over coffee. "He was in no condition to sign legal documents that week. His right arm was affected by the stroke, and he was on medication that would have impaired his cognitive functions." By Friday afternoon, I had the handwriting analyst's report. The signature on the quitclaim deed exhibits significant deviations and is highly unlikely to have been written by the same individual who signed prior documents under Ronald C. Bundy. The notary was Monica Verrill, Callista's college roommate, now relocated to Arizona, a detail that made obtaining testimony from her more difficult but not impossible. That evening, I received a call from Michael, an accountant at the family business. "I've got something you should hear," he said, his voice low. "I was in the meeting room next door yesterday, and I accidentally left my phone recording." He sent me the audio file. Callista's voice came through clearly. "Dad, Mom, you know the company's struggling. The bank loan is higher than we told Avanya. If we don't consolidate control, we could lose everything by next quarter." My mother's softer reply, "But doesn't Avanya deserve to know she's put so much into the business?" "She's busy with her corporate career," Callista answered dismissively. "She doesn't care about the family legacy like I do. And besides, those documents never reached her, did they? It wasn't just greed. It was desperation mixed with opportunity, and my parents had been convinced it was the only way forward. That weekend, I unlocked the fireproof box under my bed. Inside was the old living trust document my father had asked me to store years ago. I opened it and read, "In the event of parental retirement or death, all properties and assets are to pass to Avanya K. Stroud, sole daughter and legal heir." Below was my father's real signature, the wide, swooping R, the deliberate C, the funny loop in the B of Bundy that he always joked looked like a 6. But there was more. A clause I'd completely forgotten. "Any amendments to this trust affecting Avanya K. Straud's inheritance must either bear her signature or be executed after her 35th birthday." My 35th birthday was 2 days away. The following Sunday, my mother texted brunch at Stone Cafe, neutral ground. "We should all just talk." Callista added, "Don't wear drama." I replied simply, "I'll be there." Stone Cafe in Plano had glass walls and industrial lighting. When I arrived, they were already seated. Mom wore one of her coral blazers like she was interviewing for a job. Callista stood when she saw me, arms open like we were long-lost friends. The conversation started with light chatter until Mom leaned forward and touched my wrist. "You'll understand someday. Evie, we didn't want you burdened with property stuff. You've always been more sensitive." That word again. Sensitive. It wasn't just a description. It was a dismissal. I may be sensitive, I said softly, but I'm not blind and I'm not small. Not anymore. Evie, come on. Don't be dramatic, Callista sighed. Drama requires performance, I replied, standing up. I'm just done pretending this isn't real. After the failed brunch, I stopped by my parents' house to collect some personal items. In my old bedroom closet, I found a photo frame with our family trip to San Antonio. Except the photo had been altered, I'd been erased from the image. I popped open the back of the frame, curious, and there it was, the original photo, folded and hidden behind the doctored one. But there was something else, a handwritten note from my mother to my father. Ron, I'm not sure about this plan of Callista's. Are we doing right by Evie? She's always been the one we could count on. My mother hadn't been the architect of my erasure. She'd been a reluctant participant, swayed by Callista's more dominant personality and whatever financial crisis they thought they were facing. The following Saturday, I drove to my parents' house with a black folder containing every piece of evidence I'd gathered. The magnolia tree still leaned slightly left, like it was bowing toward the sidewalk. I noticed the wind chime my mother loved had been replaced with a new one glass instead of copper, sharper sounding. Like they decided to start fresh without me. Callista opened the door wearing white. Not cream, not beige. White, like this was some kind of coronation. Glad you could make it, she said sweetly. We're all waiting in the living room. Inside, the room was staged like a tribunal. Dad sat in his recliner, arms crossed. Mom perched on the edge of the couch, hands neatly folded in her lap. On the coffee table lay a folder not mine. Callista reached for it the moment I sat down. This is just a formality, a final draft of the division agreement. It's been reviewed by a third-party mediator. I held up a hand. Before you go any further, I unzipped my case and began laying out my documents on the glass. 1, 2, 3, quietly, deliberately. This is the original living trust, dated 5 years ago with both parents' signatures. Silence. Mom shifted, Dad looked somehow smaller. And this is a notarized copy of the property deed transfer filed last month. The notary is registered to Monica Varel. I slid over a highlighted printout. I think you remember her, Callista. No one spoke. And this letter, I said, placing the final sheet flat on the table, is from my attorney, confirming that these transactions can be contested, and that fraud, especially involving forged signatures, is grounds for civil and criminal action. Callista's eyes narrowed. You're bluffing. Then take me to court, I replied calmly. You're vindictive, Evie. You always have been, she scoffed. You ran off to college and came back thinking you were better than us. I tilted my head slightly. I came back because no one else was willing to pay the second mortgage. No one else stepped up when the business was failing. I didn't need your permission to exist, but you needed my money to survive. My voice didn't rise, but it cut. Mom gasped, not in shock and fear. She clutched Dad's hand. He didn't squeeze back. You never said you didn't want the estate, she said softly. You were always so sensitive. We thought Callista could handle things more compliantly. I finished. The room stilled. Just then, my phone buzzed. I clicked on speaker. This is Attorney Norrell Nix, the calm voice announced. If we don't have confirmation of mutual resolution by Monday 9:30 a.m., we will proceed with a formal petition for injunction and review of all assets in question. I trust that's clear. The legal process wasn't quick or simple. The initial hearing judge refused to make an immediate ruling, instead ordering family mediation, first a process Callista tried to manipulate by offering me a settlement that would give me access to only a small fraction of what was rightfully mine. The company's struggling, she argued during one heated mediation session. If we divide everything now, there won't be anything left for either of us. Then we should work together to save it, I countered, not cut one person out entirely. After 6 weeks of legal wrangling, a second judge reviewed the evidence: the forged signature, the recorded conversation, the contingency trust clause, and the timing of my 35th birthday. Effective immediately, he ruled. A freeze is placed on all transferred estate assets. Probate records will be reopened for review, and a formal investigation into misuse of family funds is authorized. As we left the courtroom, my father called my name. I turned, surprised. "Avania," he said, his voice smaller than I remembered. "I signed those papers when I was still recovering from the stroke. I wasn't thinking clearly. Callista said it was just reorganizing things for tax purposes." His eyes filled with tears. "I never meant to erase you." I nodded once, unable to speak, and walked away. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was the first honest thing he'd said to me in months. 6 months later, I pulled into the driveway of my grandfather's lake house in Cedar Ridge. The judge's final ruling had granted me ownership of this property, along with a 45% stake in the family business and a portion of the retirement accounts. The house still smelled like cedar and memories. I'd spent the last few weekends renovating, not to erase the past, but to make room for a future that honored it while allowing growth. As part of the settlement, the family business was restructured with professional management. Neither Callista nor I had direct operational control, reducing the potential for personal conflict while preserving our ownership stakes. I used my logistics expertise to implement the modernization plan I'd originally proposed, and within months, the shipping times improved and costs decreased. Callista had initially refused to speak to me after the ruling, but financial reality eventually forced a cautious collaboration. We weren't friends, but we were finding a way to be business partners. On a sunny October afternoon, I stood on the deck of the lake house, watching the water ripple against the shore. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother. "Would it be all right if we stopped by tomorrow? Your father has something he wants to give you." I hesitated before replying. 1 p.m. works. "Just the two of you?" They arrived promptly the next day, looking uncertain on the doorstep of what had once been a gathering place for family celebrations. My father carried a wooden box under his arm. "This place looks good," Mom said, glancing around at the fresh paint and new furniture. "You've made it your own." We sat on the deck with iced tea. The conversation was stilted but civil. Finally, Dad placed the wooden box on the table between us. "Your grandfather made this," he said. "It was supposed to go to you on your 35th birthday, but with everything that happened," he pushed it toward me. "It's yours now." Inside was a leather-bound journal filled with my grandfather's neat handwriting notes about the family business, wisdom about managing wealth, and personal messages addressed to me. "Did you read this?" I asked. Dad shook his head. "He sealed it before he died. Said it was for you alone." Later that evening, after they'd left, I read through the journal. On the final page was a note dated just before my grandfather passed. "Avania, if you're reading this, then the winds must have shifted. I feared they might. People forget what's fair when fear gets involved. I've always known your heart. It's why I chose you, because you'd protect, not possess. Speak softly, but stand when it matters. Sometimes justice takes time, but it always knows where to land." He'd also left instructions for a small trust he'd established separately, enough to help me start over if things went badly. He'd anticipated the potential for conflict all those years ago. In the months that followed, I established the Legacy Bundy Foundation, focusing on helping family businesses manage generational transitions without fracturing relationships. The irony wasn't lost on me, but perhaps our painful experience could help others avoid the same mistakes. To everyone's surprise, I invited Callista to join the Foundation's advisory board. Her initial email response was curt. "Why would you want me involved?" I replied honestly, "Because you understand better than anyone what happens when fear drives decisions. And because, despite everything, you're still my sister." She accepted with conditions, and our first meeting was tense but productive. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning. The following spring, I hosted a small dinner at the lake house. My parents came. Callista came with her new financial advisor. She'd finally started addressing the money management issues that had contributed to her desperate actions. We ate on the deck as the sun set over the water. After dinner, Dad hesitantly raised his glass. "To new beginnings," he said. I didn't immediately raise mine. "I think," I said carefully, "that we need to acknowledge what happened before we talk about new beginnings." A heavy silence fell. "You're right," Mom said finally. "We failed you. Avania, we let fear and favoritism blind us to what was fair. I'm sorry." "I was afraid," Dad admitted. "Afraid of losing everything. Afraid of disappointing everyone. I made choices I can't undo." Callista stared at her plate. "I was drowning," she said quietly. "After the divorces, the debts. I convinced myself you didn't need the inheritance like I did, that you wouldn't notice, that it was justified." She looked up. "I was wrong." I nodded, taking in their words. "Thank you for saying that. All of you." I finally raised my glass. Not to new beginnings yet, but to honesty. It's a start. Later that night, as everyone was leaving, I placed my grandfather's origami crane on the mantelpiece in the living room. It wasn't just paper. It was the part of me they had tried to erase, the child who folded hope into corners, who stayed quiet because she thought love had to be earned. She lived here now, proud and whole. This story wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming worth after years of being overlooked. Because family doesn't just mean shared blood. It means mutual respect. Sometimes you don't need to slam the door. Sometimes standing up for yourself doesn't mean shouting. It means walking away with your dignity intact, and perhaps, eventually, finding a way back on your own terms. Through it all, I learned that inheritance isn't just about assets or money. It's about values, truth, and the courage to protect what matters, even when what matters most is your own self-worth. Thank you so much for joining us on this powerful journey through the forgotten heir. We hope Avanya's story resonated with you and perhaps even reflected some of your own experiences with family dynamics and personal worth. Remember, sometimes the most important inheritance isn't property or money, it's the strength to stand up for yourself and the wisdom to know when to fight and when to heal. Avania's journey reminds us all that true family is built on mutual respect, not just shared DNA. If this story touched your heart or made you think, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more compelling family dramas and stories of personal triumph. Your support allows us to continue bringing these meaningful narratives to life. Share this with someone who might need to hear that they deserve a place at the table, or perhaps with someone who needs a reminder about what truly matters in family relationships. Drop a comment below and let us know. Have you ever had to choose between peace and justice in your own family? What did you choose? And would you make the same decision today? Until our next story, remember that sometimes the quietest actions speak the loudest truths. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next video.